if Parliament were to decide, that it wanted to hold another referendum on the matter of Europe, how long would the process take? How long, in your view, would be required from, say, a Prime Minister announcing that, a bill to hold such a referendum getting second reading, and polling day?
Okay, I'm going to lead off. Craig is the master of detail referendums. He leads into us on referendums. But I'll just tell a couple of principles, which is for any electoral event, whether it's an election or referendum, key is that the rules are clear to everyone, sufficiently in advance, to campaigners, to electoral administrators to run it, to voters. So there is an absolute, one of the principles is clear rules sufficiently in advance. And the second principle, the second fundamental principle, is that voters are sufficiently informed. So whatever leading period one has, that the electorate, because it's all about voters, are sufficiently informed. Those are two guiding principles that underpin what we talk about when we talk about lead-in to electoral events. I'll hand to Craig.
So I think there are a lot of variables within the process. So I think I'd work on the basis that the referendum was being taken forward as a preparer referendum. Obviously, Parliament would have the opportunity to change any aspects of that in taking through the bill that was necessary to set up the referendum. So that's one of the variables here in when contrasting it with another national poll, that there is a piece of primary legislation which is required. So parliamentarians have the capacity to vary any aspects of the process. In terms of the legislative period, that would obviously be in your hands, but an important part of the work that we would have to do during that process is to assess the question. We've got a statutory responsibility to assess the intelligibility of the question and then report back to you and to the government on the detail of what we found on that. On a binary referendum question, our recommendation is that that would take us approximately 10 to 12 weeks. That's on the basis of some of the previous question assessments we've done and the kind of research that we need to undertake in order to provide you with a thorough and detailed assessment of what we think the intelligibility of the question is. So clearly, if the legislative period was going to be shorter, there's an interaction between those two time periods. Parliament would have the option, the government would have the option to publish the question before the bill. In previous experience for the UK, the question has been on the face of the bill, but there are ways in which the question could be published beforehand so that we could begin that work. So that's one of the examples of where actually there is fluidity in timing. Then, after Royal Assent, within the legislation as it currently exists, there is a period of 10 weeks which is specified. 6 of that is for the designation of campaigners, and then 4 of that is for the formal campaigning period at the end. Again, that is something which, in taking a bill through the House, parliamentarians could look at changing if it felt that was required. I think, as Bob's alluded to, in all of the aspects of a referendum, as with any other election, there's a balance and a trade-off between the time taken and the risks associated with it. And in all of the aspects I suspect we'll touch on in many of the answers with you today, there is flexibility on timing of various aspects of the work which we and others would do, but by shortening periods you create risks. Some of those will be tolerable risks, some of them will not be tolerable risks.
Okay, so if there's some flexibility, what is the shortest period from the government announcing it intends to bring in a bill? What would that be?
By definition, there's a period of time for the bill to go through Parliament.
Sure.
And that's in Parliament's gift. That can be quite quick, or not, as the case may be. And not to underestimate, that can be done quickly, but it is not just a case of taking previous referendum legislation. There's been learning from previous referendums. One would want to update the legislation, most of which would be non-controversial, one would hope, but it would need to be done. Then, under the legislation, the 2000 Act, the pair is referred to, there is this period of time where campaigners apply to be registered with us, to be registered campaigners, and then there is a period of time for designated bodies, the 2 lead designated bodies. So there's this 4-week window for registration and applications. The Commission currently decides in 2 weeks who the 2 lead bodies are, and then there's 4 weeks left for campaigns. So you've got that 10-week period. So theoretically, one could go from Royal Assent straight into that 10-week period to take it to polling day. But it has to be said, in recent referendums, that's not what's happened, and it's not felt practical for many reasons.
Right, so it would be possible to... The answer to the question is, however long the legislative period takes, and at the end of that, add 10 weeks, and you would you could get to polling day, bearing in mind the point that Mr Westwood made about the question, because that would assume the government had published the draft questions before, and you were doing your 10 to 12 week worth of focus groups and so on, in parallel with the passage of the bill.